Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste. At the Atharva Forum, a Shiva Sankalpa initiative, it is our privilege to partner with the Indian Knowledge Systems Division, Ministry of Education at AICTE for a seminar series. We thank all of you for joining us for the inaugural session of this IKS series with the keynote and panel discussion on Translating Knowledge to Know-how. IKS event series by the Atharva Forum and the IKS division proposes to bring alive the rich scholarship in Indian knowledge systems in the current times with the best of our scholars sharing their knowledge and experience with a live audience. Public participation and interaction with experienced scholars is necessary at all times, and especially now during times of an overload of technology. It is very encouraging to see young students over here participate and learn and gain from our experienced panel over here. Briefly about our illustrious panel, Professor M.S. Ananth is the former director of IIT Madras. He is a visionary leader for higher education in India, a gifted teacher with brilliant oratory skills. He is one of the best professors of chemical engineering in the country, and the remarkable National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, NPTEL, is considered his brainchild. Innovation and entrepreneurship are central to a nation's success. The IIT Madras Research Park, set up by Professor M.S. Ananth, is living proof. The IIT Madras Research Park was set up with the agenda to have a strong portfolio of cutting-edge research straddling multiple sectors. The Research Park provides a world-class facility that started functioning in March 2010. Welcome, Professor Ananth, and thank you for accepting our invite.
Thank you.
I call upon Dr. Meenakshi Jain to please felicitate Professor M.S. Ananth.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Dr. J.K. Bajaj, Padma Shri, is Chairman, Indian Council of Social Science Research, ICSSR. He is a renowned physicist who has evolved as an established social scientist, having worked extensively in areas like scientific and technological tradition of India, Indian society, economy and polity, religious demography, natural resources and geography. This year, 2022 is being celebrated as the centenary of Dharampalji, and it is only appropriate to mention that his student, Dr. Bajaj, has stated the most significant learning that he owes him is an appreciation of indigenous Indian polity, and the essence of it lies in the autonomy and centrality of the locality of its people. Dr. Bajaj understands both the philosophy and the engineering of things. His article on Francis Bacon is a pioneering critique of modern Western science. He has spent quite a lot of time in highly effective direct interaction with the tribes of Madhya Pradesh and Eastern India. The Resource Atlas of Madhya Pradesh, the Resource Atlas of Jhabua and few more have been published jointly by the Center for Policy Studies and Madhya Pradesh Council of Science and Technology, with Dr. Bajaj as the editor-in-chief. I request Dr. Sampadananda Mishra ji to please come on stage and felicitate Dr. J.K. Bajaj. Professor S. Ganti Murthy ji is National Co-ordinator of the IKS division of the Ministry of Education, Government of India at AICTE. Under his leadership, the IKS division makes policy recommendations for the promotion of IKS. He is a professor of bioscience and biomedical engineering. Before IIT Indore, he was a tenured full professor at Biological and Ecological Engineering Department at Oregon State University, USA. In the area of research, Dr. Murthy's research is broadly focused on sustainable bioprocessing and system analysis. I request Dr. K.E. Sitaram to please come on stage and felicitate Dr. Ganti Murthy. Our next speaker, Pranav Kumar Vasishta, is a student of Dharma Shastras and the Constitution of India. His study with late Professor Navjoti Singh, who founded the Center for Exact Humanities at IIT Hyderabad, has given him an appreciation of how to approach the study of Shastras in a manner that is contemporarily relevant. Pranav's formal study is in computer science and he has an MS. Pranav contributes at the Atharva Forum and holds an advisory role. He is currently associated with Purna Pramati, a Center for Integrated Learning, Bengaluru. Welcome, Pranavji, to our seminar. I request Hallie Kalyan, who is also a very important part of the Atharva Forum and has flown down specially for this event from Hyderabad, to please come and felicitate Pranav Vasishta. Professor Ganti Murthy ji to conduct the session.
Matrubhyo namaha, Pitrubhyo namaha, Gurubhyo namaha, Sabhaye namaha, Sabhapadibhyascha namo namaha. Na janami padyam, na janami gadyam, na janami shabdam, na janami chardham. Chideka shadasya hridadyotate mukhanissarante girischapit. Sabhaye namaha. A very good evening and warm welcome to you all to this very first series, seminar, conducted jointly with the IKS division and the Atharva Forum. At IKS division, we conduct a range of things, and one of the vision and mission of the IKS division is to conduct interdisciplinary research into all aspects of Indian knowledge systems with a view for societal applications. So essentially, we are really focused on the Laukika Prayojana more than anything else in the IKS division to begin with. And when we talk about interdisciplinary research, it ranges from all the way from Sahitya to technology and all sciences and engineering and all areas of Indian knowledge systems. And we also contribute all the way from school education to higher education, curriculum development, funding research projects, establishing research centers, and all those things. But one of the things that is very, very critical for any knowledge system to thrive and rejuvenate, because if you look at the way that the Indian knowledge systems has been evolving and the state of it currently, for the last about 100-150 years or so, the traditions of actually creating new knowledge have been kind of a little dormant because of various reasons. And if we want to really bring it, so essentially if you look at the state of the knowledge traditions, the kind of last sutra texts were written or things were written probably 150, 200 years ago. That's from the Kerala School of Mathematics. And that's essentially when the most, we'll see original work being done. And if we want a knowledge tradition to be alive, we want new and original work to be done and bring it to the contemporary times and integrate, and essentially it has to be a dhara of Jnana Ganga that flows. And for that to happen, it is important for us to, if we look at the Indian knowledge systems the way that it is right now, if I can say in one word, it is essentially confined to the libraries. And what we need to do is we need to bring it to the laboratories so that new knowledge can be created. So that is essentially the IKS division's fundamental vision of bringing Indian knowledge systems from the libraries to laboratories. And that requires a range of work all the way from contributing to the school education, higher education, so that we can actually prepare the next generation of scholars and create and do deep, encourage new scholars and delve deep into various topics of the Indian knowledge systems. And this format of seminar series was conceived as a deep down intellectual manthan of our knowledge traditions. These are designed for audience to go deep into an issue and then see what is it that we really need to do and do that jnana manthan so that we can get that amrita from it. And the very first seminar that we are having is on transforming knowledge to know-how. So as is a tradition in Indian knowledge systems, we'll begin with questioning even that, whether is knowledge know-how, should that be transformed to know-how, all those things. And with that in mind, we have a fantastic panel here. As Ruchiji was mentioning, we have Professor M.S. Ananth, who is a pioneer in converting that knowledge into know-how, creating that intellectual property rights, and how do we really enable that for our country as a whole. And we have Dr. J.K. Bajaj, who was a direct shishya of Dharampalji, and whom we know, and the kind of pioneering work that they have done. And you have Pranav Vasishta ji here, who has, again, background in masters in computer science and also a traditional scholar who's teaching at Purna Pramati and works in fundamental aspects of how do we bring Bharatiya Drushti to everything that we are looking at. Because until now, if you look at the frameworks that we have been looking at, they're all most of the time there have been Western frameworks that we look at the Indian situation. So that is essentially what is called in humanities is, I think, ethic perspective. What we really need to develop if we want to rejuvenate and bring our Indian knowledge systems to laboratories is we want to have our own perspective, own way of looking at things. And that is that emic perspective that we need to bring. And we have on our panel pioneers in all these areas. So with that, I would like to get this evening started with Professor M.S. Ananth's keynote speech. And I would request Professor M.S. Ananth to...
Good evening to all of you. I had actually brought some slides, but I forgot to tell that I had slides. So I'll try and make do without the slides. I'm going to talk today about the idea of a university. I'm talking about what the Renaissance thinkers framed as the idea of a university. Of course, the most famous book in that is by Cardinal Newman. But I don't know if people have read it. It's very hard to read. I suggest you keep a dictionary by your side because he uses the most unusual words. And in addition, we probably won't agree with all his opinions. What I want to talk today is about the classical university. And I want to point out that it's customary for many politicians, both in the center and in the state, to think IIT professors aren't doing much. They'll typically ask you, what do you teach? I say 1 course, 3 lectures a week. Is that all? What else do you do? They don't realize that the rest of the time is spent on research, a lot of it which can be futile. Sometimes you work for years and then you discover that what you are trying to prove is actually not right. So this is common, and unless you have good students, it's very difficult to recover from that depression. But in any case, they keep asking you, and I keep telling them that if you do more than 5 hours of teaching in a week, you can't expect research productivity. You also need very good students and you need a lot of investment. The governments are unwilling to accept the last statement, but I must say all governments, including in the West, they all think, they don't think of higher education as an investment for the future. They are looking at their own individual political careers and to see if they can get some mileage out of funding an institution. I'll come back to that. Then I'll talk about research and teaching. These are the only 2 activities in the classical university. But there have been, out of all the demands that have come to us, in particular in IIT, 2 demands seemed very relevant. One is the demand for a higher gross enrollment ratio. That is, the fraction of students who are actually studying divided by the fraction who are actually eligible to study. So this number, I'm thinking of 92, when 95 and so on, when I was looking at it as D in academic courses. This number should be typically 30% or higher according to UN studies. And in India it was then 15%. And one back of the envelope calculation will tell you that to bring it to 30%, you need to build 1 school every week. And this was practically being done, but we didn't have teachers. But so we felt that we have to use information communication technology in order to be able to teach many courses. And we wanted a virtual university. That didn't work out, but the NPTEL program was funded by the government. And it has now more than 1,000 courses available online. And many of them can be taken for credit in many different institutions. So teaching, and the other thing is research. Teaching is a logical activity. Research, on the other hand, is primarily intuitive in the sense that the idea generation comes by intuition and then you work out the logic of it and the consequences. And I want to say something about creativity as we understand it. And I also want to say that research universities have been historically the source of creativity. It's particularly because you have young minds who are not yet committed to views. So, and these are our students. In fact, our PhD students always, we give an introductory lecture and tell them, we talk to them after 6 months, after assigning guides. And I tell them, if you're very frustrated with your guide because he's not helping you, You should be satisfied that he doesn't know how to help you. He's not perverse. He just doesn't know how to help you because he has run out of ideas. He has hired you as a PhD student who may come up with a new idea. So this seems to help, but the fact is that you need young people, you need people, different kinds of minds in order for creativity to work. Now, creativity can be of three kinds. It can be discovery, it can be invention, or innovation. The research park idea that we are talking about today really concerns itself with innovation. Innovation need not be completely new. It can be a new way of using an old idea. But innovation alone, of the three forms of creativity, innovation alone always involves an economic component. And it's that innovation where we seem to have lacked. We are actually very innovative people, but at the same time, we have not done much of patenting. And of late, the universities abroad have overtaken us with our own students. They take our students and they produce intellectual property which then they charge us for using. So this has been the practice. I'll come back to that again. Then I want to talk about university research parks as a whole and about the IIT Madras Research Park in particular. And then I want to say a few words about the way forward. I must first start by saying that the idea of the university that we use now is a Renaissance idea. And the idea is based on three assumptions. The first assumption is that there is a unity in the tremendous diversity that we see around us. And this unity can be discovered only by a combined study of natural and social sciences. I must say here, the social sciences includes humanities. I must say we have somewhat neglected that aspect in even the IITs. But one of the problems there has been, as E.O. Wilson, the famous Harvard biologist who always gets into controversy, I hope I don't by quoting him, but E.O. Wilson pointed out that while science, 200 years, 150 years ago, science saw the world through five senses. It's the same five senses that the humanities people used too, but they looked at it with a perspective. So they were able to advise the scientists on the larger picture. But humanities people continue to look at the world with those five senses, whereas science is able to look at the world with the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which is so wide that humanities people can no longer, with five sensory organs, provide a perspective for the study of science. And when I say science, I include engineering. So this has been a problem that the Renaissance people felt both humanities and science should be involved. And thirdly, they have made the assumption that education leads to endless progress in society. I mean, you might question it. There is always a hiccup here and there, but by and large, you can see in the last 500 years, there's been a tremendous improvement in the quality of life in all respects. Of course, we've been destroying the environment. That's a separate issue. But we do know a lot more about health. We do know a lot more about just about every aspect of life. So these three assumptions were what the Renaissance thinkers came up with. And then von Humboldt, in the 19th century, early 19th century, he pointed out that research brings passion to teaching, and teaching rejuvenates the teacher. So he said these two should go together all the time. And this became a habit. Research universities have been created everywhere with both teaching and research as the primary responsibilities. Now, let me say a few words about teaching, and because that's a core responsibility in IITs in all the institutions. There's some principles of teaching. I would like to share a couple of them. One is an anecdote which illustrates very well what teaching is about. Professor Kelkar was the first director of IIT Kanpur, and he was a very famous director. And I've never met him, but I'm a great admirer. Lots of things he said were very impressive. One of my friends joined Kanpur when I joined IIT Madras way back in 72. Then he tried to teach. He was asked to teach a course on fluid mechanics. And like all youngsters, you get very enthusiastic. You want to teach everything you know to the students. So you make a royal mess of the whole thing. At the end of it, you're not happy. The students are not happy. Let me, however, assure you that the second iteration is far better, because you've learnt a lot from the first iteration. But my friend got very frustrated, and he went to Professor Kelkar and said, Professor Kelkar, I can't cover the portions. Professor Kelkar made him sit down, gave him a cup of coffee and said, young man, I did not hire you to cover any portions. In fact, I hired you only to uncover a part of them. I think that's a beautiful statement. That's really what teaching is all about. I think you have to share what you enjoy with the students, and their future, their everything doesn't depend upon what you teach. If it did, I would have resigned long ago. I know they'll survive anyway on their own intelligence, and I can't do too much good or too much bad. I'm sort of in between. I try my best to teach them what I like. So this is the second principle of teaching. The third principle is that repetition is necessary for teaching. And I can tell you another anecdote. When I was a graduate student in the US, one of my roommate's professor in civil engineering, he dragged me off to listen to a pastor. He said, you must listen to him, he speaks so well. So I went to listen, and the pastor spoke very well, but he repeated himself 7 times. In those days, I was a good student, so I listened, and I heard all the 7 versions. So at the end of it, I went to the pastor and said, why did you repeat yourself 7 times? He said, gee, did I do that? Then I did, right? Because in the school of pastors, they tell me that only 1/7 of the congregation is listening at any time. So if you want to reach the whole congregation, you have to repeat yourself 7 times. So I tell my students, you must be thankful that I don't listen to the pastor. I only repeat myself 3 times. I tell the students what I told them earlier, then I tell them what I'm telling them now, and then I tell them what I'm going to tell them next class. And this is, you provide the continuity, because the problem with students is they are a little out of phase. When they want to go and watch a cricket match, you want them in class. And that doesn't do good for either. In any case, there's the other question, the other point I want to make is something that mathematician, very famous mathematician, he said, he narrated a story, and it's naturally in favor of the mathematician. The story is about a physicist and a mathematician. They were both given a glass of water and asked to make tea. So they boiled the water, put the leaves in, made tea. And then they were again called, after the experiment, they were given empty glasses and asked to make tea. So the physicist filled it with water, again boiled the water, made tea. The mathematician filled it with water, left it on the table. He said, by the previous theorem, I've already made tea. You don't get tea. But the point is this is a very, very strongly recommended method. If you already understand the concept and if you have solved a problem that is very similar, don't solve this again. This is not good advice for entrance exam because you need practice. But it is very good advice for education. I think it's important that Aurobindo also says this. Aurobindo says that you should do you should do the same problem by a variety of methods, solve the same problem by a variety of methods rather than solve many, many problems. These are some principles of this thing. One last question, and there are many more. Aurobindo has a beautiful book on it. Again, I would recommend that you start reading Aurobindo with a dictionary by your side. He uses unusual words, but they are always just right. When you look at the dictionary, the word is just right. But there was a blog by a professor of physics in Caltech, and he says he was walking with his son, 5-year-old son, along the beach, and the son said, "Dad, can you explain how these waves form?" And he sort of rubbed his chin and said, "Well, I don't know if I can." Then the boy said very quickly, "Dad, doesn't matter, just try," as if the difficulty was the father's, not his. And this is true to some extent. When you understand something very well, you can teach undergraduates. When you don't understand them so well, you teach postgraduates. And when you don't understand it at all, you teach PhD students. So, this is sort of a thumb rule. But it's true that what you call undergraduate portions depends on the teacher and depends on the subject. If you really know the subject very well, just about everything becomes an undergraduate portion. But this is about teaching. But let me say a little bit about research. Research is a much harder topic because basically research depends on a creative idea that comes by intuition. And this Sperry and co-workers in 1981, they got the Nobel Prize. I'm not in that area, so if I make a mistake, please, I would welcome you to correct me. But broadly, my understanding is that he said that Sperry and co-workers worked with brain damaged people whose brains were damaged during accidents, and they came to the following broad conclusions. that the brain consists of two parts, the left and the right. The left is logical and good with words, good articulate, whereas and thinks in terms of actual words. Whereas the right brain is musical, it's intuitive, and it doesn't follow logic. So in fact, its lack of logic is what generates new ideas. But because most of these ideas are wrong when tested logically, you have to give credit to the left brain also. You get your idea from the right brain and then work it out logically. And very often our students come up with ideas. Many ideas are wrong, but some of the ideas are new, and you wonder why you didn't think of it for 20 years when this kid comes in now fresh and he comes up with this idea. Research is a creative activity. Now what happens is in actual universities where you have this mix of brains, mix of disciplines, any mix meeting very often, you have sparks coming out, you have ideas generated. And these ideas are then inspected, of course, for logical validity. Ideas have come very often from Indians, but the intellectual property rights associated with them have gone to the West. And with the result, you end up, for example, whenever you touch the keyboard, you pay some small amount to the US. And it's as if it's not rich enough. With 1.3 billion people touching the keyboard, you can see how much they'll be earning. And the question is, this creativity, how do you cache this creativity yourself? And you ask the first question, where does the creativity come from? And in the last 70, 80 years, research parks have been created in the universities in the West. And the US has lost count of it, more than 100 research parks. In the UK, it's a small country, has 65 well-known research parks. So there are any number, and we didn't have any in India. I'm talking about university research parks. We also examined some patents that came from Silicon Valley. Out of an arbitrary 100, we found about 50% of the patents had Indian names associated with it. And this was a shocking discovery. And so I went to MHRD, Ministry of Human Resources Development, now MOE, and told Sudeep Banerjee, the then secretary, I quoted Louis Pasteur out of context. Louis Pasteur said, discovery is the result of chance meeting a prepared mind. I said, we've been preparing minds for 50 years and chance is meeting them in Silicon Valley. So with the result, all the discoveries happen there, they get all the credit, and we lose money as well. And of course, Sudeep Banerjee said immediately, well, we'll say yes, you go ahead and start one. So while there's a lot of talk about bureaucracy, my experience with bureaucracy, it took 9 years to start the research park. But at the top level, most of them are very, very appreciative. I mean, if once they know your effort is sincere, you do get a tremendous amount of help. But as I said, I told them that Louis Pasteur said this, so we want to create in the backyard, essentially, these minds, these ideas will get a good reception from the industry. And so we decided to create a research park. There are many research parks all over the place. And as I said, one of the research, there's an association of university research parks. And they had a meeting in 2006. They've had meetings several times. In 2006, and Dr. Chidambaram, who was the chairman of our IIT, Dr. R. Chidambaram, he told me, Ananth, you go and represent India about research parks. I said, what research park? He said, well, you're the only one talking about it, so you go. It doesn't matter if there's no research park at the one. So I went all the way, and then the first speaker in that conference was a Chinese lady. And she said, China has a very modest program, only 100 research parks, only 100 acres per research park, and only $1.2 billion support per research park. So I put up my hand and said, can I go last? After this, how do I go and speak there? So he said, no, this is the... Then I went up and said, one proposed research park, 10 acres of land. I mean, how can you get more land this thing in a city? And then I said, at that time, we had an estimate of 200 crores. And I didn't translate crores. Many of them didn't know. And I didn't tell them 1 crore is only 10 million. And I didn't tell them the rupee exchange rate and all that. So they thought it was not bad. But in any case, we went to this and got a lot of ideas from there. What you need is a collection of people with talent, a mix of minds. You need intuitive people and you need logical people. Let me illustrate this. The best illustration for logic and intuition combination is probably our Ramanujam and Hardy. Ramanujam, the mathematician, wrote to Hardy and Hardy invited him. And apparently Hardy posed a very difficult combinatorial problem, and Ramanujam wrote down the answer on the board. It went to several lines, and then it was so beautiful that Hardy said it has to be right. Nobody can cook up something like that. And then he worked on it for 1.5 years and finally proved it was right. Then he went to Ramanujam and said, "How do you come up with such guesses?" He said, "I didn't guess it. Goddess of Ramakkal told me." Which brings me to the point that culturally we've had always faith and humility as prerequisites for discovery. And I don't know that that is true of all cultures. It's certainly true of our culture. And we've lost a bit of both. But in any case, we have to find other ways of doing this. So we wanted to start the research park. So I approached. I must also say that my timing was good because our Tamil Nadu government had an MGR film city, which was 40 acres right adjacent to IIT Madras. And they were closing down that film city because guys with computer simulations could do much better than any setup that you can work up. So they were closing it down. So I went and met the chief secretary and asked him, I said, "Give me 10 acres, 12 acres. And he said, "Ananth, is this fair? You've got 630 acres and you're asking me for 12 acres. I said, "I've got 630 acres of pure Saraswati land. We'll only worship Saraswati in this land. But across the road, we'll worship Lakshmi along with you and with the industry." And he said, he actually said yes. That's all the argument I gave him. He said yes. He was a remarkable man. And he immediately wrote on the file, "Please put up the file for giving land to IIT Madras." And I was so happy. He said, "Don't smile yet. This is just the beginning." Because there will be objections. They'll say, "Why land to IIT Madras?" So he said, "It'll take you 6 years," and it took me 6 years. 2002 I met him. 2008 is when I got the land. Then, of course, we asked MHRD for some grant. We wanted 1/3 of the cost to be met by MHRD. 1/3, we said we'll do it by our own accrual. Part of it from alumni, and then we wanted to take a bank loan. And taking a bank loan from a government organization is very, very hard. So what we did was created a Section 8 company for the research park. And the Section 8 company had a board of directors, of which the chairman was the director of IIT Madras automatically. And in fact, when we borrowed money from Canara Bank, borrowed about 75 crores. Actually, we took less. We got a sanction for 75 crores. We took about 40 crores and we've returned it since. So, we've done luckily very well because the timing was perfect. And also the industry in Madras was also very, very cooperative, and they took space in the research park. So we built this first phase and then we built the second phase, but it was never inaugurated because of various problems. I won't go into those problems. So finally, Dr. Chidambaram said, "Don't inaugurate or do anything, just dedicate it to the country." And so, which is what we did really. But in any case, the research park turned out to be a very good success. The alumni also helped a lot. Many of them have experiences, and what we figured was that we need a slightly different model from the model in the West. In the US, venture capital is readily available. In India, capital is available once the venture part is over and it's very safe. When the industry is running very well, then money will come in. You don't get venture capital. So we decided that we'll keep 15% of the space in the research park for nurturing startups, for nurturing people who need venture capital. So we did that, and I must tell you, by the way, the student reaction was also phenomenally good. And when we built this research park, we also did something else. We provided a beautiful canteen, a mix. And we may think we think with our heads, but I must tell you, I think we all think with our stomachs. When your food is very good and you've had eaten your fill, then all the beautiful ideas come flowing out. In fact, many of the good ideas have come from the canteen in the research park, and also our students go across to eat in the canteen there. But we also have ginger hotels there because we want people to come, experts to come and stay overnight. And we have rooms that you can see IIT Madras from, and we cash in on that by telling alumni, room with a view of IIT Madras a little more, 10% more. So they don't seem to mind. But overall, the interaction has been very good. I must also say there is a difference. When the when these old students come back to IIT, these are industry people, very confident people. When they come into the campus, they somehow feel like students again. So when they talk to you, they are afraid that you may think the problem they are solving is trivial, so they complicate their problem. I mean, the existing problem is hard enough. I don't have any solutions. And they complicate it further. But I find when they meet me in the research park, they feel like equals. All of a sudden, the conversation is so much better and the problems are so much more solvable. The other thing that has happened is that because there are different sectors, people from different sectors there, these people interact a lot and you get ideas from one sector to the other. This exchange doesn't happen readily in India. In fact, the first CEO that we had, Dr. Sandhya Sekar, she was very good. She went and told Tatas, the group of companies, you don't talk to each other, so we'll give you a Tata common space in the research park where all the Tata company people can meet and talk. And that went down so well with them. And they took the space. So we have a total of 1.2 million square feet, of which 400,000 square feet was finished when I was director. And then Professor Bhaskar finished the rest. The occupancy is about 80-85%. And we are amazed at how well the thing has progressed. Dr. Ashok Jhunjhunwala is the one who is in charge of the research park. And he created a credit system. One of the problems that happened was, for example, in IIT Delhi, they had IBM take space there. They gave them space in the hope that IBM would interact in research, but they didn't interact at all. They came in and closed the doors. So they had to finally, IIT Delhi had to get rid of IBM with great difficulty. So we didn't want that to happen. And this can happen quite easily because the industry is very, very focused. So they think you are not focused, and we shouldn't be. As academics, we are not looking at money from one pot. We are just looking at various problems, and they feel that they don't gain enough by interacting with us. But so we created a credit system. We said if you donate to IIT Madras, for every 1,000 rupees you will get so many credits. If you come and teach a course here, and some of them come and give lectures, all that, for that you get some points. And these lectures are very important. Let me give you just an example. I have been teaching many years. When I was about 55, and I had taught already for 30 years or 25 years, and I was teaching a course on mass transfer, design of cooling towers and things like that. And our students have a way, I mean all students have clever ways of doing this. They'll give you a smile, which is very polite, but it says you don't know anything about this topic, but you still are trying to teach us this. I mean, my reputation was about being a theoretical guy who doesn't do practical design. So I taught this. Then I called Sriram Towers. I have an old student there. He is in charge of this thing. He does this for a living. So at that time I called him and said, Shivaram, you have to come and give a lecture in my course at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Sir, I have a meeting. This is Guru Dakshina. This comes first, I said. So he said yes, and he came. And I was sitting in the back. My students didn't know this. And Shivaram gives this lecture, and two students are just in front of me in the previous bench. And one tells the other, not bad, Ananth knows design. So I had to tap him and say, yes, I do. And then he got really white in the face. Sir, I didn't know you were here. I said, you didn't insult me, don't worry. But the fact is that the students have a right to be skeptical, and you have to assure them that you're not talking through your hat. This is actually really happening in the industry. So this, now what we have is the whole lot of people there. We have 5,000 people in the research park, and they are very happy to come and give a lecture on what they do, how they do the design and so on. So I think it's been really an eye-opener. And also when talking to academics, you get solutions from, you don't know which department will solve a problem. Sometimes a mechanical engineering problem, we have a dean, ICSSR, Industrial Consultancy and Sponsored Research. He has a talent map of IIT. I mean, he takes keywords from you and puts them down as your talent area. And out of this, one mechanical engineering problem was actually solved by a chemist. So you never know who will solve the problem, because who has seen what problem before and how these problems have been tackled. So this was a revelation. And we also had a lot of students interested in startups. They wanted to do things creative. So along with the 81 batch of alumni, we created a lab called C5. C and Phi is the Greek letter, but it's called, essentially it is a center for productization. You come up with you walk in with an idea, walk out with a product. That was the principle of C5. It's called Center for Innovation. FI is written as the Greek letter. And we found that from C5, there were ideas that were coming up that were good enough to be incubated in the research park. For example, that this electric scooter, I forget the name of this. It's now in Bangalore. It's very popular. They are our alumni, and they started the company here, and then they grew too big because they're suddenly asking for 10 million, 100 million, and so on. That's not the kind of money we run into. So we sent them to Bangalore, and they got this thing there. But the basic idea was developed in C5, and then improved in the research park, and now it's in manufacture, proper manufacture. There are many of these cases, and there was one kid who went along when I was director. He came and said, he gave me a card. I said, second BTech, third BTech student giving me a card, visiting card. He said, sir, please turn it. If I turn it, it says non-working director. It's a company C6 and so on. This is amazing. It takes only a few to inspire the rest. And so this has been going on. Lots of faculty have ideas. One faculty member had a company called Dhwani, for example, which was actually, he should have called it Ultra Dhwani because he was using ultrasound. And he was using ultrasound to detect possible cracks in an oil pipeline or weak spots in an oil pipeline. I mean, if you were a Saudi Arabian millionaire sending this oil through the Trans-Arabian pipeline and there was going to be a crack tomorrow and you know it today, it's a very big advantage. You can fix it very quickly and so on. So he's been doing extraordinarily well just by an ultrasound analysis in a computer. He's written the software for it, of course. So I would say there are many, many examples of people doing very well. There is timing involved. We're not saying everything will be a success. In fact, when I asked for money, I was MHRD had to consult Finance and Planning Commission. I had called Dr. Montek Singh Aluwalia to come and address the students. And our students can be very, very good. They listen beautifully and they ask difficult questions. And he was very pleased. He came twice. At that time, I was completely obsessed with the research park, so I told him all about the research park. And the second time I tried to tell him, he said, you already told me. He has a good memory. But then our papers got stuck in the Planning Commission. I mean, all ministries are involved. So I called him and said, do you remember your support of the park? But the Planning Commission has objected. He said, Ananth, all papers don't come up to me. I said, now it has. And you'd be surprised. Next day they called me from the Planning Commission and said, sir, we have cleared all your papers. So it's simply a matter of your timing. You have to get people to convince people that you are making a sincere effort. The final hurdle was with the finance revenue secretary actually, and she was really good. But on paper, they were going to reject the research park thing. And when we asked why, she said, the director in the ministry said, because we have not done it before. So I said, that seems like a very good way to progress. And Sushma had said, cut it out. I've given you time to come and present and you can't say this. I said, look, I've put in 9 years effort. You can't reject it without listening to me. But she heard me through for half an hour. And then she changed the noting. She said, this is a project that can be supported. And I have to thank her for it, because thinking back on it, every time people complain about the bureaucracy. But if you really think back, if you were in that seat, you would do the same thing. Because you're the one who is taking a risk and you don't know the bona fides of the person doing it. So I think it was necessary. You have to explain your projects in detail, patiently, any number of times, if you're convinced about it. And of course, if the Uparwala wants it, it'll finally get signed. So I did get everything, we got everything just as we wanted, just in time. And it's done very well. Now we have, in 2006, the Commerce Ministry Secretary called me and said, Ananth, you have to come to Delhi next week because you're getting, IIT Madras getting an award for the largest number of patents by a university. I said, there must be some mistake. We had only 6 last year. He said, others had less. But not because they didn't have ideas. It's simply because you have to spend a lot of money on patenting, and we didn't have that kind of a budget. So we weren't going to spend money on futile, because we are not going to invest in that. Whereas with the industry participating, they are willing to just about patent anything. I mean, you have to put it up properly. But now we had 40 patents in the first year of the research park, 120 patents in the next year. Now it's more than 150 patents every year. So it's amazing. The number of ideas is not the lack of ideas. It's the lack of an infrastructure to do this. And it also has to do with budgets. You compare with MIT on an average gets 100 times per faculty funding for research as IIT gets. And this was in our heydays. So I think it's a matter of money and a matter of willingness to take chances. And I think these are important. And I'm only thankful that overall the research park came out very well because of the participation of so many people. The industry people all pitched in. And they've got one of the companies, Saint Gobain, is very pleased with the thing. They've got 120,000 square feet. And they're producing more patents from the India Center than from any other center in the world. That's what their chairman MD told me. He's also an old alumnus of IIT Madras. So it's been an experience. It's been if I had known it would take so long, it could take 9 years for me to get the land and these things, I probably wouldn't have attempted it at all. Luckily, I didn't know. Having started it, I'm a fairly dogged fellow, so I wouldn't let go till it actually happened, and it did happen. So I think it's a matter of consulting people, making your ideas correct, and then having the patience to explain it again and again and again. I think that's important, because you can think your ideas are wonderful. You have to be able to convince other people that your ideas are good. I think that's all I have to say. So this is what we did in IIT Madras over a 10-year period. By 2009, by 2010, the park was ready. And the second phase was built by Bhaskar Ramurthy, who was my successor. And at the moment, it's doing very well. That's all I can say. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Ananth. That was a wonderful walkthrough to what it really takes to establish a research park and to create that research and innovation infrastructure, and especially the kind of struggles that you described and the 9 years of Bhagirath effort that was there. That really is a testament to what is it that we really need to invest, not just simply the buildings don't make institutions. It's the people behind that and the thoughts behind it that really make the kind of real world-class institutions. I mean, going from like 6 patents a year to 150 patents per year is a tremendous achievement. I would also request now Dr. Bajaj to please make a few remarks about what was the perspective really on looking at this from a traditional Bharatiya drishti of whether we want to really look at what is knowledge, what is know-how, and then being a Shishya of Dharampalji, where did we lose it? What was the real issues? What are the issues that this thing has gone astray, and then how can we bring it back again with that unique Bharatiya drishti that we can provide? Thank you.
It was a pleasure to listen to Professor Ananth. I have been visiting the research park, especially during the last couple of years. I've had several occasions to go there. It's a very beautiful building, as he said, and the canteens are good. The spaces are wide. The Ginger Hotel, I have had the occasion to use it. And my friend, Professor Ashok Jhunjhunwala, who is now in charge of the park, he keeps telling me that they're doing very great things there, and occasionally writes to me how one of the startups, the other startup, their valuation has gone up from that where you had invested 300 rupees or 3,000 rupees. You are getting a return of few tens of crores. And I get surprised at the miracles that are occurring there, the magic that is occurring there. These are interesting things. I have been never obtained a degree from the IIT. I've never taught in the IITs. But I have been an observer of the IITs. And I've spent time in some of the IITs, especially in IIT Kanpur and IIT Bombay. I will just make one observation for the benefit of Professor MS Ananth, and then move on to what Professor Murthy wanted me to talk about. When I was in IIT Kanpur, I'm making this observation because it's relevant to what I'm going to say later. Whereas in IIT Kanpur, one of the talks which used to go around amongst the senior students was that the graduates from the IIT are highly desired everywhere, and the Indian Railways every year recruits a large number of graduates, a large number of engineers. And they're very willing to accommodate any IIT engineer who will go there to accept a job. But I was told, and these engineers, their students used to tell me, that no IIT graduate ever accepts a job in the Indian Railways. And the reason given was that Indian Railways still carries the old British tradition of making a new graduate work under a foreman. And so you went there, you were actually asked to go to the shop and use that huge hammer that you have to use in a mechanical shop. But this, they said, how can this be the job of an IIT engineer? And I always felt that over time, the engineering in India, and particularly engineering IITs, got separated from what is the essential business of engineers to know materials, to transform materials, to transport materials and energy. That is engineering, that you transform materials and energy. But to do that, you of course need equations. You need to know fluid dynamics, you need to know thermodynamics, you need to know electrodynamics. But you also need to know how to actually make things. And that's why, I don't know, you are perhaps there are some older people. When I was younger, BE students, then there were very few B.Techs, there were Bs there, used to carry a big drawing board with them. And the engineering colleges normally used to have shops from where you used to see smoke coming out. All that has vanished. So we now do pure knowledge within the IITs, within the engineering colleges. And consequently, we have to separately work on know-how. While knowledge and know-how, at least in engineering, went together, we somehow separated it from each other, reduced, the higher the engineering, more it became separated from actual doing of things. This happened much more in India. I don't think it will happen in Germany, for example. Maybe it happens in US. I have been worried about this. Okay? When I see a mechanical engineer, by the end of his degree in the IIT, he, instead of becoming a mechanical engineer, he becomes a software engineer. And many IITs give a dual degree, one degree and a degree in software. When a civil engineer also becomes a software engineer, I don't know who will come and do the actual civil engineering, actual mechanical engineering, actual chemical engineering, actual building of things and moving of things. And it is a problem. And I don't know whether research parks solve that problem, because research parks are some more of IT to a large extent. But they also, of course, I should not lower this level. They bring the industry and the engineers together. They do innovation.
Sir, IT is only 12% in the research part.
I'm very happy. I must be wrong, but that this is happening. Overall, that is the kind of things which is going on. At least that is my impression. And that anecdote that I heard in 75 in IIT Kanpur never gets out of my mind. That here are the best engineers of India who are unwilling to go work with the best mechanical engineering organization of India. I think we'll have to worry about it. I was the director of HAL, independent director of HAL for a while. And this issue always arose there, that the engineering knowledge, to convert it into the knowledge of doing things, of designing, was a difficult exercise. They were doing, many of them, actually HAL used to have a collaboration with IIT Madras. Many of their earliest directors, who will be now, earliest engineers who will be now directors and CMDs, were trained in IIT Madras. But I found there the best designers were not the engineers. The best designers were people at the level of foremen. And they used to give them that kind of work because they had the sense of doing things. And it is not that I'm saying, they told me that they are the best designers. And designing in aeronautical engineering is a very high art, very high craft. Is also very high science, but is also what Professor Ananth was saying. That requires intuition, which in our ways will translate as yukti, but that's what it required. And that yukti comes, as I'll now quickly soon tell you, not merely from the reading of Shastras. It is something much beyond that which is required. And now let me, when I was told that we are going to discuss this issue of converting knowledge into know-how, I thought, what will I say about this issue? And then I thought maybe I will talk about how this kind of questions are dealt with within the Indian knowledge domains. Maybe I thought I'll tell you how in a field like Ayurveda, which is a science, which is also an applied discipline of delivering health and delivering arogya, how do they discuss this issue? I'm taking Ayurveda texts because those I know a little better. This will be, I think, across all knowledge domains of India, the similar thoughts will be there. When you open Charak Samhita, the first thing it talks about is that how Ayurveda was created. And it tells you that when Brahman, through his sankalpa, Shiva sankalpa we are talking about, and through his tapasya, created the universe, he also created the knowledge of the universe. So the first the first knowledge of Ayurveda was with Brahma. And the knowledge which was with Brahma of Ayurveda was complete, total, undivided, unclassified. It was complete Shashvata knowledge that Brahma had. And that was then, Brahma transferred it to Daksha Prajapati. Daksha Prajapati transferred it to Ashwin Kumaras. And Ashwin Kumaras gave it to Indra. That was the divine propagation of knowledge. And at all these points, it was a Nikhila, Kevala, Shashvata, Sampurna. Initially, when the creation happened, people didn't used to have disease. It was Satya Yuga. It was Krita Yuga. Because they were so much in conformity with nature, the disease was an impossible thing. Disease is to go, to do things which are aprakritic. You go away from nature, and that's what causes disease. When you fail to follow the niyamas of what Prakriti is directing you to do or expecting you to do, that's what Roga is. So when, as time passed, and people started moving away from Prakriti, from their Sahaj presence within the Prakriti, the Rogas came. And the greatly compassionate rishis of India, when they saw, rishis did not have this problem. And that's actually, the text is saying that. Because they knew yoga, and they knew swadhyaya, they knew tapasya, so they will not get this problem. But they saw that people who do not have this, they are getting vignas through disease. So they met, as the text says, on the sides of one of the beautiful faces of the Himalayas. There were a very large number of them. Charak Samhita names 53 of them. And this is, then it says Prabhriti. There were many more. And they said, this problem has come, how do we solve this? And they chose Bharadwaja and asked him to, or Bharadwaja perhaps volunteered, to go to Indra and obtain the knowledge of Ayurveda from him. And of course, Bharadwaja had the competence and the intellect to be able to obtain this knowledge from a divine source like that Indra. And he came back and he gave it to the other assembled rishis. And one of them was Punavrasu Atreya. And Punavrasu Atreya then taught it to 6 of his students, Agnivesha, Bhela, Jatukarna, Parashara, Harita, Ksharapani. And each of these 6 students wrote a separate tantra. Agnivesh Tantra is Charak Samhita, which was by consent declared to be the best. Now, what I want to, this is the story, but this story also says that up to, from Brahma to Indra, the knowledge of Ayurveda was complete, undivided, unclassified, shashvat, unchangeable, timeless. But through this propagation from Bharadwaja to Agnivesha, it became human knowledge. Till then it was not. So what Agnivesha, Bhela and others are doing, they're converting that what was complete into the knowledge which is accessible and usable for human beings. It cannot be knowledge which is not usable. That is lying there with Brahma and Indra. What we are working on is the knowledge that is useful for human beings. And so there cannot be a division between knowledge and know-how. Sushruta Samhita gives a slightly different story. And that starts from Dhanvantri, who is also the divine holder of the complete knowledge of Ayurveda. And who then gives it to Sushruta and from there downwards. But Dhanvantri, while teaching, he is saying that the knowledge, this knowledge as I know and as it is known by Brahma, is complete. It is undivided. But since human beings have limited intellect and limited capabilities, Sushruta, or the time it reaches Sushruta, it is divided into Ashtavargas. Before that, it's not divided into anything. It is undivided knowledge. And this division to Ashtavarga is not the truth of Ayurvedic knowledge. The true is the complete knowledge. Ashtavarga is what we can comprehend. We as human beings can comprehend and therefore use. And this kind of story you will find everywhere. That the ultimate knowledge of that subject, the true knowledge, the complete knowledge, is the divine knowledge. To us human beings, what is given is to, from that, obtain as much as we can use for ourselves, for our purposes. The purpose of Ayurveda is not to know the truth about life or truth about arogya. The purpose of Ayurveda is to ensure arogya for ordinary people like us. And so they completely, continuously keep saying, all these classifications we make, the classification, for example, to describe dravya, you have this classification of rasa, guna, virya, vipak, prabhava. They keep saying this is the classification we make for our purposes. Humans make this kind of purposes to understand the multiplicity of dravyas which are there. And this is not the final truth. So you must always be aware that there can be dravyas which according to your rasa, virya, vipak, prabhava classification should be, for example, vatnashkas, and they may turn out to be vatkarkas. And they have no problem with this. So the exception to the rules is no problem in Indian sciences. It's not so in Vyakarana. Vyakarana is in fact all about, Pandini is all about defining exceptions to the rules, because he is not trying to tell you what is the ultimate theory of bhasha. He is trying to tell you that how to grasp the bhasha which is prevalent in the world, how to understand it, how to comprehend it. Any comprehension will be incomplete, and hence whatever classification we make, there will have to be exceptions to it. This understanding that the science or engineering or doing of things in the world is doing of things in the world. It is not comprehending the ultimate truth. We are not searching for that ultimate equation, which we in physics used to do when I was doing physics, which will explain everything. We are not searching for that kind of equations. And that kind of equations are not knowledge for us. We are searching for Vaidyas who know the properties of dravyas, and in addition to knowing that, they know what to apply where. Who are yukti yukta. And yukti is very important in Ayurveda. They keep on saying, you have a Vaidya who knows the Shastra, who knows all the dravyas, who knows all the theories, but who cannot treat, who doesn't know the yukti, what to apply where. Because the multiplicity of parameters which have to be considered while treating a patient. And there's a Vaidya who perhaps doesn't know the Shastra that well, who doesn't know the Dravya well, but who has yukti. The latter will always be preferred to the former. So Indians have no problem, no issue about knowledge being a useful human construct, and not being bothered about knowledge which is the ultimate truth. Of course, there's a sphere of knowledge where you look for ultimate truth. There's a domain of knowledge where you look for, but even there, Indian texts have never claimed that ultimate truth can be written down anywhere. In fact, when we look at this text like that of Ayurveda or that of Jyotisha or Jyotir, or that of Vyakarana, it can be said that these are anyway lower texts, they are Vedangas and not Vedas. And perhaps the truthful texts are the Vedas who are concerned with Brahma Vidya or the Upanishads. But even there, the Indian understanding is very clear that whatever humans comprehend, that is for the comprehension of the humans, it is not the truth. Mundaka Upanishad, for example, this is a famous shloka of Mundaka Upanishad on which everybody has commented, says that, there is this difference between apara and para. There is the paravidya, which is supposed to be the truth about the world, and there's the aparavidya, which is the knowledge of the world. And he says, Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharva Veda, as also Shiksha, Kalpa, Vyakarana, Nirukta, Chandas, and Jyotish are aparavidyas. He is not saying these are not paravidyas. And the Adi Shankara comments on that shloka of Mundaka Upanishad. You will know. He says that the texts of Upanishads also is apara. That the texts of Upanishads are texts concerned with Brahma Vidya, but they are not Brahma Vidya. They are not para. And Ramanuja, commenting on the same thing, he says, all indirect knowledge, Vedas, Upanishads are all indirect knowledge of Brahma, and all of them belong to apara. Para is the Sakshat Darshana. Below that, everything, whatever humans do and express, is apara. Now, this understanding is extremely important, which we have missed somehow. And I don't think outside the Indian way of thinking, these things have been clarified so distinctly anywhere else in the world, because Greeks always thought that the ideal forms they can always comprehend and catch in the world. But this is not merely esoteric knowledge. This is knowledge which should have meaning for what we do in engineering, what we do in science, what we do in medicine. Because this knowledge that we are here to perform the useful activities there that are useful for the humans. Even the Brahmana or Upanishad is there to do the useful activity of showing the path or writing down the path through which you will perhaps can reach the Sakshat Darshana. And similarly, all medicine is to show you the way how you can ensure arogyam, how you can ensure that people do not violate the ways of the Prakriti and live well. And perhaps at some point when they live well, they'll also learn to have that ultimate apprehension, some of them. But knowing that ultimate is there, beyond our reach, and is important, and is the truth, gives you the Viveka as to what is proper to do and what is improper to do. When we talk so much about Indian knowledge systems, I think this very basic understanding that Indian seers have about what is human knowledge and what is its purpose, how it should be used, what is its extension, what is the proper domain of it, how far we should take it. We have lost all sense of that. We have become so westernized that our engineering for us becomes writing down equations. In fact, if any people in the world were to be good at doing things, and Indian people are what Dharmapal has taught us, Indian people are good at doing things in the world. They created one of the best, in fact, I can still go and show you there, one of the best irrigation systems in the world, unimaginably complicated in its overall execution, but done through such simple methods. And Dharmapal used to write this, that Indians had perfected this art of doing very, very simple, small methods. We produced the best steel in the world with small furnaces, and this steel was so good that the great Faraday, in the process of discovering his theories, equations of electrodynamics, used to say that I have sufficient supply of woods, which was how Indian steel was called, for my experiments. But when I need more, I'll always use Indian steel rather than any other steel. We have just ignored this. And there's nothing of this which should have not been looked into. Because I don't think that way of making the steel, our modern engineers, they could have added to that knowledge. They could have carried it further. And we tried the Bombay metallurgists with them that why don't you study this? But they don't want to take it because this is not esoteric. This is not great. I think I should stop at this point. I'll say a few more things. But let me tell you one more anecdote before I close. One of the important chemical engineering professors of IIT Mumbai, Professor Shankar, you will know him there. I worked with him, and we did a small calculation on this was, I think, early 80s, or we calculated that since independence, how much of new sources of energy India has created, and how much of older sources of energy India has destroyed. And our calculation showed that the new sources of energy that we created in total amount to, in terms of that, what the chemical engineers know, I don't know that well, that British thermal units, if you BTH you calculate, in BTH terms, the amount of energy that we would have destroyed sources would be much more than what we have created in terms of new sources. And all this calculation, this data, I went and presented in near Chennai. There is this Kalpakkam nuclear power plant, so it's the source of, and they were, I think, the whole of their sentence was there. At the end of it, the head of that plant, he got up and said that all the data you have presented is right. There's nothing problem. Only problem is that the resources that you say have been destroyed are decentralized resources, and we have no use for them. We know we need resources that we can control. We are centralized. Now, this was a very different way of doing things. Indian way of doing things was different. Their medicine was also decentralized. Because those people who think that they don't have the truth. The truth is with the Creator. He has given us some understanding of that truth, and that truth we have to use for the good of our fellow human beings. They work at all levels, and mostly they work at decentralized levels. But we have learned from the West that everything that we learn, we must think of it as the final truth. And everything that we learn, we use it for centralizing the resources and centralizing that. I'll end by 2 more minutes, giving you which is very beautiful story of a Vaidya. This is in Mahavaka of Vinayapitika. There is a Vaidya called Viveka, who was the royal, I don't know whether it's the right term to use, he worked in the court of Bimbisara. There are many stories about him. That one of them is that because he was a very busy Vaidya, so lay people could not get treatment from him. So there was this, people will become monks for a while to become eligible for getting treatment from him. And then when they get well, they'll go back to the lay. That was the kind of reputation he had. And according to those Pitikas, that Buddha had to give some instruction not to bring this kind of people into the Sangha. About Viveka, it is said that he went to learn Ayurveda in Takshila. And his teacher, he learned with him for 7 years. At the end of 7th year, he went to his teacher and he said, "Oh, Vaidya, oh my teacher, I learned much and I learn easily. I understand well and do not forget what I have learned. I have studied 7 years and you do not see the end of this art. When shall I see the end of this art?" And his teacher tells him, "Take this spade, ye kudal utha lo, and go around Takshila, a yojana all around Takshila, or bring something to me which is of no medicinal value." And this man goes with his spade all around, a yojana from Takshila, and after several months comes back and tells the teacher that I have not been able to find anything which doesn't have value in medicine. And his teacher tells him, "You have done your learning. This will do for your livelihood." Now, even at this stage, all he is telling is, "जाके जीविका कमाओ, जाके लोगों को ज्ञान दो," ये नहीं वो कह रहे हैं. And this idea that the learning of Ayurveda means that you know your world so well that everything you know is you can. And it's not merely theoretical knowledge. You know what the dravya is, and you know what its gunas are, and you know how to do the paka vipaka of it, and use it for treatment, and teach the people. And this idea that na anaushadham kinchit, vishwa mein kuch anaushadh nahi hai. This is repeated in Charaka, it's repeated in Sushruta, it's in every text says this. So this is the kind of knowledge, and this is the kind of useful knowledge. Kind of knowledge which included know-how within the knowledge. And I think for these people, anybody who knew his dravyas but did not have the yukti to apply it for the purpose of arogyam, will not be a Vedya, will not be a scientist, and what he knows will not be knowledge. Let me close it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bajaj. That was a wonderful journey of looking at things. Was unless there is some kind of a prayojana, there is no real knowledge that is there. And then that distinction that you made about the para-vidya, the kind of insightful things that it actually provides is, it's profound, very profound. The way that, I hope you must all have heard about it. The story of, and then they try to make that line, and then there is this friend who says, don't do, he's saved ultimately. So what that story really tells us about is that fundamental and very, very important is that Viveka Jnana to distinguish whether it should be done or not. Not just about what to do and how to do, but also about why to do it or why not to do it. So I think invite Sri Pranav ji, Vasishta ji to talk about this from the Shastric perspective and Bharatiya Drashtikona.
Sri Gurubhyo Namaha, Sabhaya Namaha, Namostu Ramaya Salakshmanaya, Devyai Chatasya Janakatmajayai, Namostu Rudrendra Yamani Lepyo, Namostu Chandraarkamarutkanebhyaha. As somebody who is youngest on this panel, and also after, say, two stalwarts have spoken, the only kind of reason why I stand here is that I try to represent the parampara of my gurus. So whatever I be speaking is something that I've learned from them, and whatever is good in them belongs to them, and if there's any mistake, that's mine. So with these words, I'd like to start with the ideation of translation of knowledge to know-how, and there's a very specific question posed whether knowledge and know-how can be separated. I think, say, while it has already been asserted that Bharatiya Jnana did not actually separate knowledge and know-how, I'd also like to mention that even in the Greek thought, it wasn't the same. In fact, if one goes and looks at Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, there's a distinction of knowledge drawn in there where you find three terms, many terms, but these three terms are very significant. One is episteme, the second is techne, and the third is phronesis. There's been a lot of literature that has come in the past 10 years, specifically speaking about how phronesis, which translates to practical wisdom in some sense, prudence in another sense, and these are all approximate translations, but they capture, say, practical wisdom and prudence captures phronesis. So how, over a period of past few hundred years, episteme, which is primarily understood as scientific knowledge, and techne is art, how to translate, say, the nature of the sense of skills that are required to ensure that you can do something. These have been the focus of the world, whereas the sense of practical wisdom of phronesis went outside of the scope of what needs to be done. The sense of prudence is where the call for Viveka might as well come. So while I did want to say this as a beginning, I also want to point out that the sense of knowledge as a whole captures know-how. But whether knowledge as a whole is something that is learned is a key question in itself. So what captures the knowledge in all dimensions? This is a question that is posed, and we find responses from the tradition. We have Sri Harsha mention that every vidya has 4 sthanas: adhiti, bodha, acharana, and pracharana. Only in that place where all these 4 sthanas are prevalent can one say that the vidya is complete. Adhiti is learning for oneself. But how do you know that you have learned? It can only be done when, say, you are able to teach it to somebody else, bodha. But it's also important to know that you can only teach that which you have understood. So the way in which you can come to a conclusion as to you have understood something or not is when you have been able to impart what you have understood to somebody else. And if it has been inadequate and you notice that it is not what you intend to impart which has been imparted, then necessarily you realize that there is a gap. So how do you realize that, say, this gap can be filled? That's where, say, you try and, with whatever knowledge that you have right now, with that bodha, you engage in the acharana of the same. Try to put it to practice. And almost all of Indian knowledge indeed mentions an anushtana of how to actually bring these to practice. So it is through anushtana that one realizes, and by anushtana I mean, say, if you have the knowledge of something that, of language that you have learned, a few words, then you put it and frame a sentence. So what we do even in, say, when language is taught to a young child, this is what is done. So the way in which you bring that together and put it to use in your own life, in your own little way. So when you start doing it, that acharana increases the sense of understanding, the bodha, and that's a kind of a loop which is there. So every time, the next time you do a teaching, bodha, then because of the acharana, it actually enhances. And always the sequence remains the same, that the extent of bodha that you have is only that which you can impart as what you can teach. But more importantly, these three stages, though they are connected, the last one is the kind of hallmark that says you have indeed come to a stage where you can go around and tell people, what we call as preaching, the pracharana. So if you have a situation where you say something and the rest of the people just accept, just because of the kind of adhiti, bodha, acharana that you have carried, that's when the sense of the vidya is complete. Now here, say, the sense of knowledge and know-how, they are always intertwined because of bodha and acharana. So this is what I did want to bring in to attention. But there is also a key question. If you have knowledge and know-how, we want to get it to some purposive action. Some kind of a karma is to be done, which is why this is actually desired. So we have a very beautiful kind of description of what are the kind of characteristics required to ensure that whatever we try to act upon is indeed resulting in a success. So we have a word in our language called Karya-Sadhaka. A Karya-Sadhaka is somebody who is able to get the work done and done well. So amongst our itihasas, we have the figure of Hanuma, who is possibly the best Karya-Sadhaka that one can ever imagine. And in Sundarakanda, there's a very fine description of Karya-Sadhaka that one gets, and there are 4 qualities that are mentioned. I just thought I'd bring that to attention, specifically in the context of translating knowledge to know-how. Dhritir drishtir matir dakshim sakarmasu nasidati. This is the quote from Sundarakanda. And the 4 qualities mentioned are dhriti, drishti, mati, and dakshyam. Now, dhriti is certainly courage, and in our times we should also possibly say it is courage of conviction. It's not just courage to do something, but courage of conviction that this is the knowledge that I intend to put to action. And there are many reasons why our current world necessarily makes us run away from the knowledge that we have. And I was fortunate that I happened to learn from Swami Gyanswarup Ananth, who I believe was an embodiment of Adhiti, Bodha, Acharana and Pracharana. He was formerly Professor G.D. Agarwal of IIT Kanpur, who, because of his learning as an environmental engineer and also being the first member secretary of Central Pollution Control Board, and further also as someone who is a great devotee of Ma Ganga, he was ready to put his knowledge to action, so much so that he was ready to give up his life. He fasted unto death 6 times, and in 2018 he gave up his life seeking Aviral Ganga, and the manner in which he did that is a great lesson in itself. And having learned from him, I believe that this sense of dhriti, the courage of conviction, that what I have learned must indeed be put to action, even if it means that I am ready to give up my life. That is the sense of the dhriti. And the drishti is the sense of the focus to vision about, say, what is the purpose for which I am doing. that drishti, without which there's a very genuine possibility of getting astray. There are many kinds of ways in which one can get say, lost in the kind of activities that happen. And then you have mati. So the drishti, while it is actually clear about the goal, mati must be about the presence of the situation that one is in. Unless and until we are conscious of the nature of the situation that we are in, the drishti and the dhriti would not actually move forward. So having that presence of mind, and that too about the presence of and awareness of the situation, becomes important. And finally, the dakshyam. The dakshata is all that is the kind of requisite skills and the knowledge needed to ensure that the kind of karma that is taken up is never something that will fail. This is the learning from Hanuma as the Karya-Sadhaka. And it is important to also note that when does one actually get these sense of dhriti, drishti, mati and dakshyam? It is something that we learn from our tradition, that any kind of a human action that is done, it comes only because of the kind of desire that we have. There is a sequence of how any action happens. Janati, ichchati, athakaroti. You need to have the knowledge. And this knowledge is again divided into some. And I thought I should bring this to attention because there is a classification of this done in Mimamsa, Nayayikas have done it, and that is something which requires great attention in every act that we do. So, what is the first type of knowledge that you require? You of course need to know what needs to be done. So there is the Karya-Jnana that is called for. This Karya-Jnana is then that actually leads to a chikirsha. And chikirsha is a technical term used for desire, but it is a desire which has two other forms of knowledge included within it. One is that, say, if you have a desire to do something, that isn't by itself sufficient. You also need to know whether, say, you have the ability to get it to fruition. That ability and that knowledge is the Kritisachata Jnana. So Kritisachata Jnana by itself is not sufficient because your desire may not sustain for long. The knowledge itself, for it to say continue, there is the other form which is spoken of called Ishta Sadhanata Jnana. That what you are actually trying to strive towards is also something that is your Ishta, which is basically that which you desire strongly because it is that which you like to do. So it is when these things come together, that's when cheshta happens. And cheshta is the way where we bring in our motor organs to action, and that results in the karma. So with this kind of a tale, our key requirement in terms of looking at the knowledge to know-how comes when we start looking at the ideas when we need to develop a certain sense of desire also. Let's say in an earlier time, say there was no kind of a person because of the nature of culture that we had, I would not have acted on something which I did not understand. And if I understood something, I would not actually stop myself from acting upon it. This kind of a niyati is something that over time the society has missed. And that's something that we also find a lot of trouble, which is where we find the kind of requirement of talking about knowledge to know-how. If at all we say that any person who understands something, and because he understands it, he puts it to practice. And if I do not know something, if I do not understand something, I do not actually try and do it. This principle of niyati, if followed by every person, then we have a different world altogether. And that kind of a thing is a cultural entity that requires to be built. And this cultural thing cannot happen unless we also have certain values that are, and virtues in some sense, that our tradition did speak about. And we have a shloka that says, Ajaramaravat pragyo vidyam arthancha chintayet grihita evakeseshu mrityuna dharma macharet. That is, if you are actually trying to learn something or you are trying to, say, earn wealth, for these two, consider yourself to be immortal. But when it comes to acting on dharma, and what is this, I don't have to necessarily mention, I'll come to it. But if it comes to dharma, act as if Lord Yama, the god of death, is holding your hairs by his hand. So this is a principle which holds for all times, And it is then that one would probably start thinking about how would I ensure that whatever I understood, I should bring it to practice. There are many things that you will find from our traditional community and also from our professors. What they say and what they do may have a gap. And the reason why that happens is something which is necessarily to be reflected on if at all we need to move forward in life, and not just for ourselves, but for the entire world and also the coming future generations. This question, something that calls for a greater attention, I just thought I'd have to mention this. And in this context, I want to give a very traditional example of say, people who are the inheritors and people who are keeping up the knowledge that we all pride in, the Vedic knowledge. I was very fortunate to be associated with a family of scholars who are Nityagnihotrins, and they are people who also have performed Somayaga. And it is stated that our country is a Yagika Bhumi. So the performance of Somayaga is something that is desirable, because this is something that India can offer which no other country has. And why do you perform a yajna? We have very strong reasons to point out, and Gita Acharya has categorically said that the entire world is actually resting on the performance of the yajna. So the fact that this sense of yajna requires to be captured, and I was fortunate to witness a yajna called Trishahasragni Yukta Mahavrata Yaga. And while witnessing it, I learned some things which I thought I should necessarily bring to attention. The scholars who were performing this, and the Ritviks and the Yajamana, they made 2 points. See, when we speak of Veda, it is both Shabda and Artha Jnana. But the focus on Shabda Jnana, which is the recitation of Veda, has received a greater attention. But Shabda and Artha are a whole. We have the great Kalidasa begin Raghuamsa by saying Vagarthavya Samprukta Vagartha Pratipattaye Jagadapitaro Mande Parvati Parameshwaro. The fact that Shabda and Artha are always together, and that sense is not captured in practice, not because there is no desire, but because the kind of society that we live in, it doesn't actually enable the kind of strengths to ensure that this happens. And how do we enable that can also bring in the practice of say, for example, the Yajamana that I spoke to was 70-year-old. And he told me, there is a Veda Vakya. I have learned Veda and several people have learned Veda. There is a Veda Vakya that says, Vasante Vasante Jyotishthomam Yadeta. What it means is that every Vasanta Kala, that is every spring, one must perform Somayaga. So he said, I can perform a yajna only after my marriage. So I got married when I was 20-year-old. Now I am 70. So over the past 50 years, have I conducted 50 Somayagas? The answer is no. So even in my own case, I have not been able to, though the Veda, by its very being, Veda is stated to be Anadi Apaurushaya, meaning that it is beginningless and authorless, because of which, if it says something, it must be done without any kind of a question. But that sense of, say, vidhi, the bhavana that this must be done, is something that did not actually translate in my own case, where I am aware of it. So why did this happen? It's a question that I do ask myself, but at least I'd like to do to the extent possible. So in that sense, I am actually seeking out people like you who are possibly, say, who could possibly go and tell to audiences in different places. And there are still people who are desirous of doing it, but because a yajna is not a task which is something that requires 1 or 2 people, but there's an entire society that actually enabled the yajna. So we have several jatis all put together were actually the required for the conduct of a yajna. In current market world, that itself actually splits. So you don't have the conducive atmosphere readily available. For it to be created requires a great kind of effort. And so even if there is a knowledge that say this must be done, the Artha Jnana, even if it is there, you do not have a parampara, then you do not know the know-how. So who would actually be able to perform a Srauta Yajna? A person who has already seen some yajnas being performed. This is what you do. This is how you actually say have the installation of a Yupastambha. So you need to know which place what and how it is done. Unless you are part of it and doing it, you will not be able to carry that forward. And this is not just true of Vaidika Yajna, it is true of Yajna of all kinds, because Yajna has been conveyed as a necessary requirement for all Varnas, which means all people in the world. This sense is something that means that unless and until we have the conscious knowledge of the Parampara, the sense of know-how, which comes from knowledge that you can seek out and learn, would not be readily available to you. So how do we try and bring these together is one point that I thought I should bring to the attention. While this is the case, the whole world in the Indian tradition can be seen in terms of three realms, three planes: Adhibhuta, Adhidaiva and Adhyatma. It is normally you find that Adhibhuta get translated as the material physical world and Adhyatma as spiritual world, but these are, say, very gross translations and possibly wrong translations also. So there is a third, which is the Adhidaiva, which is a very important factor, which people like Sri Aurobindo, when they actually pointed out Bhavani Bharati, they were actually trying to point out how the sense of the people and all their energies put together form a Daivata. So there is the Adhidaivata Dharana, and that's something which is a very unique element of our country. There's nowhere in the world that you would find, say, land being treated as a mother also being treated as a Devata. You do not find, say, a river being treated as a mother also as a Devata. This sense of Adhidevata Dharana is very important for many reasons. One thing is that Adhibhuta is where Karya happens. Any action, because we are know-how and knowledge would mean that it has to translate to action, means that we want it to happen on the ground. And this happens in Adhibhuta, but the kind of force, the source of strength for it comes from Adhyatma. But for the Adhyatma, which is the cause for the effect that you find in reality, for it to translate, for cause to translate to effect, you need to have sufficient kind of forces and energies and powers that are supporting it. And where does that come? That comes from Adhidevata Dharana. I have a mobile phone here and I'm able to see it, and so are you. The fact that you are able to see it is because the I is the Adhyatma. This object and the kind of form it has is the Adhibhuta. Because there is light, and that light is somehow ultimately sourced to sun. So the Surya, Aditya, becomes the Adhideva. And this sense is where, say, the spiritual or material doesn't actually come to the fore. And there's a classification of this in Mahabharata that Bhishmacharya has given, and I thought it might help for this audience to learn. So I have a few printouts of the same that can be circulated. So while this is the case, I'd like to come to a kind of put these thoughts to a kind of conclusion by trying to point out that while we are desirous of action to be performed and the kind of various activities that one has to take up, there is this very important instruction given by Gitacharya where he mentions Adhishthanam tatha karta karanancha prithak vidham vividhascha prithak cheshta daivam chayavatra panchamam. So there are 5 different elements that go into ensuring that an act that one actually is desirous of accomplishing and bring it to fruition. And all these, when they actually are in alignment and supporting it, that's when the action does happen. So Adhisthana is the locus of action, and it could be one's own body, could be elsewhere. Karta is the agent who actually is acting on things. Karana are the various instruments that are there and the kinds of varieties of instruments that are involved. And one also has varieties of, once you have instruments, when you have the agent, and also the locus where this action has to happen. Some activity has to happen. This is the cheshta. And these 4 do not capture the whole story. There's one invisible factor always present, which is the daiva. Once all these things are there, then does action happen. And our desire for having translation of our knowledge to action, where know-how is indeed a part of it, can come about only when we keep that these factors which are mentioned, and also the desire to be a Karya-Sadhaka oneself, like the exemplar of Hanuma, is something that we carry forward in all our efforts in whatever ways we can within the limited bodha that we have, and the process itself increases our bodha, and we can indeed do better. So with these words, I'd like to achieve.
That was a wonderful exposition on from the Shastric perspective, Pranavji. That was wonderful, really great. You mentioned about Sundarakanda and Vaishtadeva, Hanuman, Drishtarmadaksham Chokarmasanasi, that comes in when Surasa, that Akhyana there. And so, again, I want to circle back again to what we were thinking about. I think, again, you had mentioned all these, unless there is something that comes into acharana and backed by all these different aspects of self-learning, bodha, and then acharana, and then prachara, really we can't talk about a rejuvenation of knowledge systems. And I think you mentioned about the Vaidika Parampara, where you were mentioning about how this is so important. And I think even in the Laukika Parampara, if you look at the traditional way in which the Ayurveda practices is going on now, or if you look at any of the technologies, whether it be textile printing or any of these things that we have talking about, there are many that somehow that connection is somehow missing, and I think that is where the Bharatiya Drishti should be brought in. And also there is like kind of a I don't know, maybe I should say it's a misconception that when we talk about Indian knowledge systems, it's much more about spiritual things and not about Laukika aspects, whereas we were highly practical people, and as Professor Dr. Bajaj mentioned, really looked at Prayojana and everything. And in fact, even the Keynote says, Avidya Mrutyam Tirtha, Isha Upanishad says, Avidya Mrutyam Tirtha, Avidyam Mrutamushtate. So, I mean, even the technology, all these things are to cross this ocean of the life. And that's where I would again come back to Professor Ananth and seek your comments on where you are seeing this, especially from a education perspective, because what this has brought out, the comments from Dr. Bajaj and Pranav have brought out, is that really the education system is at the crux of what kind of people we prepare who will be developing things that we are talking about in the know-how, and also with the right attitude, I think, if I may say so, because ultimately we are living on a finite planet. And we need to be thinking about the larger worldview. If we want to really have a future, that is something that we need to really think about. And what are some of your thoughts?
No, I don't have any special comments on this, except to say that I think the younger generation is actually more aware and more concerned about the environment than the older generation. I mean, you can see it in just about all the student activities and so on. There are, of course, things that you would object to because they're that age. They'll do some things that you don't quite approve of. But on the other hand, they have an awareness of the environment, which is certainly very refreshing. And as far as the research part and education goes, these are not directly tied in the sense that you are talking about, because they do get experience. They meet people who have done things and they learn from them. And they do have a satisfaction of coming up with constructive ideas and actually getting a product out of it and so on. So I think this is separate learning. This is one aspect of learning, a small aspect of learning as such. But as far as education is concerned, I think building character is very important, and building character has to be done in the school. It really doesn't happen in college. By the time they come to college, they think they know as much as you do. And they may be right too, so you can't tell. So it's very hard. I think it has to be done when they are very young. It has to be done. And I think that is why I think the most important thing is to pay school teachers extraordinarily well. I think that's the most important thing, and make sure that they are respected by the students. When I was a kid, we certainly had a lot of respect for school teachers, and I'm afraid that's sort of dying out. That is something that we have to worry about.
So then I would like to open it up for a few questions. Admiral Puriji.
How do we connect these three elements? What should be done in a laboratory? What should be done in a in the academia, and where should the academia get off and let the industry take over?
And I think in large projects we've been recommending very strongly. For example, if we do it for defense, we feel there should be a committee supervising the project which includes people from the army, from the armed forces, who should be involved from the beginning. What happens is, after we produce the product, the army says this is useless because you didn't think of this. You didn't think of that situation. If we had had the army people with us from the beginning, they would have then told us right there that this is a one requirement and so on. I think that's not yet happening. In some projects it has happened. And that's one thing I can say. The other thing is, I think scaling up is now much better than before. Many projects do scale up now, and they think of scale up even before the product research begins. So it goes simultaneously. I think what we need is several people from different disciplines working together, and that's beginning to happen. It's not, and funding is certainly a big problem, but when the product is good, there's always funding ready. I think now we have the feeling, I keep saying this, India is no longer a poor country, sir. It's a rich country where a large number of poor people live. It's a slight difference. I mean, if you can redistribute the wealth, you can feed the remaining poor also. I think those are the only comments I can make for you. I don't have answers.
I think you to please state your name and then.
Yeah, this is Sampadananda Mishra from Rishikesh University and a part of the Atharva Forum. I don't have any question, but I would like to make few points on the three eminent speakers who spoke about it. When we are talking about translating knowledge to know-how, a very important point which was made by Professor Ananth. This is what is our tradition. If we look at the whole knowledge system, how it was created, it was discovering by intuition and developing by logic. This is where the greatest example, again coming to Professor Bajaj, what he made about the Ayurveda. If we look at the Ayurveda, so many hundreds of plants, their dravya gunas, their properties were described without the help of any laboratory. How did they come to know about it? Based on their swabhava, prabhav, based on kala. So there was a system, unless and until we bring this intuitive aspect, it's very difficult to know. Coming to what Pranav very briefly presented, so there are various parameters presented by the rishis, like he gave the example of Sri Harsha. He provides the parameter of aditi, bodha, acharana, prajarana. Then you come to Patanjali, who says that chaturbhishcha prakarai vidya samupayukta bhavati. You have agama kalena, swadhyaya kalena, pravachana kalena, and vyavahara kalena. This is another parameter. When you come to Sanat Kumar, you have utsaha, kala, guru, and shastra. Then you come to Yajnavalkya, he presents like drashtavya, shrotavya, mantavya, nididhyasitavya. So these are the parameters which we need to contemplate on when we are talking about the knowledge, translating knowledge to know-how. Very briefly, I wanted to remark in this way and then congratulate all of you for this wonderful session. Thank you all.
Namaste everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I'm Samir Guduru, working with the Ministry of External Affairs with the new Emerging and Strategic Technologies Division as a consultant. So just wanted to answer the gentleman first who raised the question regarding funding. So I'm involved with a startup that is based out of Hyderabad, and you'd be glad to know that the Indian Navy itself has taken suo motu action and started funding our technical apparel. So that is a great move, and I think we are heading in the right direction. Half of the funding is coming from the Ministry of Defense, and we are looking for venture capitalists. So that's the first point. Secondly, as far as my work in the ministry is concerned, there's a lot of discussion regarding ethics in the age of artificial intelligence. However, there is no concerted effort or any literature that is available from an Indic standpoint of view as far as ethics is concerned. So how does our knowledge system of ethics translate into something that is actionable as far as technologies like AI are concerned?
would be, I heard my professor, Professor Rajiv Sangal, speak on this very aspect. Professor Rajiv Sangal is someone who has introduced human values education into all engineering institutes in the country. And what he, but there was a celebrating Professor Rajiv Sangal session held when he retired from IIT Hyderabad very recently. He recalled a few points about how very recently, because of AI saying it would not take manual command, there are 2 planes which crashed and that killed about 300 people. And this became a very huge issue. So and then say all the Boeing, these airplanes were recalled. The fact that this happened, and then there are a lot of thought that happened. So Professor Sangal, in his observations, he made a few points which I do not recall all of them, but certainly he mentioned that the machine must indeed account for every decision that it takes. And if it is not able to account for itself, then the manual person who is actually handling it, he has to take over. So this way, he mentioned a few points which I'd be glad to share them. In fact, it's there on IIT Hyderabad YouTube channel, which I think it must be looked into seriously. And he also pointed out that recently Madhya Pradesh, there's a judicial academy in Madhya Pradesh where the judges there, they said there's a great temptation amongst us to have summaries from AI systems so that they can ensure that judgments can be delivered quickly. So there is a temptation of that kind, while we also know that that's something which may not capture the whole thing. So how do we overcome this was a question that was posed to him, and response to this was also something that Professor Sangal made, which I think that would be a pointer from where one can indeed build on. And one aspect that Swami Gyanswarup Sanand referred to in terms of every engineering decision that one takes. He said Samarthya must be coupled with Samarpana Bhava. And when you have people who are building systems with both these together and with the knowledge of the limitations of their Samarthya. There's a fine novel that he used to refer to in Hindi called Samarthya or Seema, written by Bhagavati Charan Verma. It's a fascinating novel about how building dams, this was written in 1960s, when it used to be said that dams are the new temples of India. And at that time, a friend of Pandit Nehru and also a Rajya Sabha MP, Bhagavati Charan Verma, has pointed out the Seema. So this Samarthya, Seema and Samarpana Bhava, these three as put together gives us a way forward in terms of understanding not just what is being called wrongly as AI, but also any kind of technology for future.
I am tempted to talk in this issue of Boeing that he is referring to. I think that was that had very little to do with this AI or anything else. It was simply a failure of control systems that the Federal Aviation Authority outsourced its task to the Boeing engineers, who went by commercial interests and destroyed their company, killed people, both things they did. So I don't think that's an example of what to do in ethics in AI. But this question of ethics, I just wanted to point out that Indian Indian Darshana doesn't separate ethics from being. There is no separate stream of ethics that Indian knowledge, and this is one of the complaints that the West always had, that as Hiranya I think said on the first textbook of Indian philosophy says that the purpose of Indian learning in philosophy is not that you become better, that you start doing things better than what you were doing earlier. You become better or good or anything. The purpose is to be what you ought to be and become a different being. So ethics in India is part of an overall system of knowledge and system of being, and it's inherent in that your actions will be ethical. It's ethics is not a set of good values. In India, it has never been so, and we have somehow now that where we teach value system. We don't have to teach value system. You have to make people who have good intellect, clean, and they will be ethical. You assume that they'll be ethical when their intellect is good. So ethics cannot be imposed from outside. That be it is part of the overall systems you build. And in the AI system, which has been built by the West, is inherently incapable of being ethical, as it happened in the case of the boy.
I also wanted to bring a point that you made earlier, that we are having a finite world and finite resources. I mentioned Dharma. The traditional Indian viewpoint is Bhudevi is a devata, and if you can indeed approach her appropriately, then there is a plenty that you can get. So how does this translate to action in our current times? We do not know what are all the kind of resources that Bhumata actually captures within her womb, and they come about only when you actually search for it and so on. But this is a modern approach where you try and search for, say, what are the resources, where, what kind of minerals, etc. But there is a very fine kind of exposition that one finds in Srimad Bhagavatam in the Chaturtha Skandha, where the discussion of Prithu Maharaja and Bhudevi, that kind of conversation that happens, is a very categorical form that is made, where Bhudevi says, many people think that they can get whatever they want in the means that they choose, can be anything, insofar as what they think is right. But that's not how things will happen. Any kind of an effort that is not Shastriya is bound to fail. She makes it categorical and says, learn from the rishis what they have actually given us as a method. And yajna was indeed a method that was provided as a way to fulfill kamya. So it's not about, say, getting moksha alone. Yajna was primarily about how you can ensure that many kamyas can be indeed obtained. And you have methods which are given. So you'll find that even to this day, there are a large number of people who will probably take up a mantra and do an anushtana, say, repeat it 108 times, 1008 times, and so on. In India, probably a majority does that even to this day. We don't generally talk about this in terms of, say, this also being a way by which you would achieve whatever we desire. One of the things in terms of the Vaidika Kratu spoken of to destroy an enemy is Sena Yaga. It's not something which is recommended, but it is indeed present. So the fact that, say, how would we take this yajna form as a way to realize our requirements is something that is provided, but that requires to be seen as a thing that we bring to practice today. And that's something that can be done because we still have people who have knowledge of these things. Before we lose them, or say we make a conscious effort, we don't actually think this can continue. But certainly, say, even if we don't do it, the Shastra would say that there'll be a time when rishis of the Parloka, they'll come and then reconstitute and reinstitute these things forward. I just thought I'd also mention this because the finitude of resources is a very modern conception, never that of a Vaidika conception, never that which has Dharma as an important element in it.
So please.
Good evening, I'm Dr. Shobha Srivastava.
Question is to Pranavji. For a desire to fructify, is Niyati plays a part or Purusharth also plays a part?
There are 4 Purusharthas, of which Kama is one. But that is only when it is in alignment with Dharma. And Dharma is what which gives you Niyati. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions from the audience? I think if there are no other questions, I think we had a fabulous evening.
Before you close,
please.
For you, we have had such a long session on what Indian knowledge is Indian knowledge systems are. I have a request, because you are actually anchoring the IKS initiative of the Government of India. I think it's all right to keep talking about this. Is very pleasant to talk about. If you know a little about Indian knowledge in different fields, it's very uplifting to talk about it. But we have to start using it for our purposes today. And for that to happen, there has to be of understanding all across that there's something valuable here. And that will happen if all the engineers that they come out of our engineering colleges, all the doctors that they come out of they have some reasonable exposure to what Indian system of medicine is, or what Indian system of engineering is. Not a ritualistic exposure. They do some 3-hour, 3-credit course, and we have done our duty. I would say that in the MBBS courses, let 30% of what they are taught Why should anybody in India get an MBBS degree without a reasonable exposure to what Charak Samhita is teaching? For example, and what a reasonable exposure to this massive Indian pharmacopoeia that we have. And why should anybody come out of an engineering course in India without knowing how Indians did engineering? Okay. And it is doable. And I think the world over, people, whatever modernity is, they have created modernity in continuation with their tradition. And we have to create our modernity in continuation of our tradition, with our tradition. It was doable. It's very difficult now because we went in some other direction. But now that you people have decided to do Indian knowledge, introduce into Indian education system, think of introducing it substantially and not ritually. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. I would recall some of the words of Mahasahasravadhani Garikapati Narasimhara Garu. I'll say this in Telugu because Bharatiya Jnana Parampara exists in Bharatiya Bhashas. He says, Acharanaloki rani jnanamu aragani annam lantidi. What that means is, the knowledge that does not come into practice is like food that is not digested. So I'm very glad to tell you, in our little way, at the IKS division, we are addressing that in a very comprehensive way. So what we are doing is, we are of course doing the courses. We are trying to introduce courses into engineering curriculums. Apart from that, we are also having these internship programs where we send the interns to the experts in Indian knowledge systems to learn whatever branch of Indian knowledge system that they want to learn for 2 months or so. And then we are also coming up with these hands-on workshops. For example, let's say we keep talking about, just to give you one example, Indian metallurgy, how great we were and all that. We talked about the wood, steel and all that. But how many of our current metallurgical students specializing in metallurgy actually know how to build a furnace? That was a gap that we felt. And then we are actually conducting these hands-on workshops where they actually will go learn from the Agharya community in Madhya Pradesh, for example, learn how to conduct these things and use the modern methods to understand and do an XRD or study the crystal structure in SEM or do those things. So that is for the metallurgy. We're also not happy with the 1 3-credit course of Indian knowledge systems. What we are also trying to introduce are discipline-specific courses in each engineering department, for example. So let's say we talk about structures. So there is a wealth of knowledge in Narada Shilpa Sutra or Mayamata or Samarangana Sutra about how to build foundations of buildings. And then there are practical examples of buildings. For example, you can see of all these massive structures built very close to the riverbeds or rivers, banks. If you go to, we all have heard about Leaning Tower of Pisa, right? But do we know that in Kashi, near the Manikarnika Ghat, there is another temple that actually leans more than that. And it's a taller structure than that. And you have a Ganga perennially flowing next to it. And this temple, is also socially speaking, this was dedicated to the transgenders community. They have a right to go and worship there at a particular time of the year. How many of us know about it? And what kind of a beautiful civil engineering problem is it to design a building with a foundation where you have a water flowing next to it? Can this not be used in our design of our piers and ports and stuff like that? I mean, there is so much to understand. We just recently visited Konark Temple, and we saw there the composite beams that are just lying outside. And they're not the rustless variety, I will admit that. They're more like, they're rusting a little bit, but not to the extent that we normally see. So these were the part of the original Konark temple. They're just lying outside. And recently, some of my colleagues went and sampled the Dhar pillar, and there are 3 pieces of the Dhar pillar. But interestingly, the crystal structure at all the 3 ends are different. So these could be very good BTech projects or master's projects for our students to study. We are not diluting the quality standards, and there is this perception out there which we need to correct as scholars, I think, that whenever we talk about Indian knowledge systems, somehow the quality standards can be relaxed. That is not acceptable. We need to maintain excellence in all things we do, because that is the real tribute to our ancestors and this Guru Parampara, because they really strove for excellence in whatever they did, and that's why they could create these things that lasted long. So, I mean, again, that was a long answer to this, your question.
I was not expecting an answer.
So there was a lot of things that we are doing in our little way, but again, that's something that we need to do as a nation. One division cannot do this. I think that's a call for our nation to work in whatever way that we can. And on that very positive note, I think we can conclude this evening today. And namaste to everyone for spending a lot of your time. And I'm very grateful to all my panelists here.